What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the podcast. Hope you're all doing well. I'm your host, Justin Harold, and with me, as always, my co-host, Jeff Santa. Today, we are bringing you the 47th episode of the Cleveland Pulse podcast, and today, we're going to keep it in the realm of the NFL draft. It just ended this past Saturday, and, me and Jeff did our grades for the Browns, but we figured that why not talk about the AFC North? And so we're going to go and kind of just talk about the kinds of drafts that the Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Pittsburgh Steelers had in comparison to the Browns, and just kind of see, how they improved their teams in comparison to the Browns. So with that being said, Jeff, how are you doing, my guy?
I'm doing good. This is going to be, a quick little recap video if you didn't catch a whole lot of the draft, especially outside of the Browns picks. We're going to be giving you a rundown today of the picks that were made from the other teams in our division, obviously Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh, how they kind of affect each other and definitely how they affect the Browns, and kind of just going off of according to how the Browns drafted, the interesting dynamics we could get into and talk about.
Absolutely. And so, I think we're going to probably do it in order of, not like worst to best, but teams that we expect to be challenges. So we'll start with the least challenging throughout the season. So obviously, I think we were both in agreement that the Cincinnati Bengals will probably top that list for us. And so obviously, they were a top 5 pick this year, and there was a lot of talk about, well, are they going to draft that offensive lineman to keep Joe Burrow safe, or are they going to go with wide receiver or potentially Kyle Pitts if he was there? Unfortunately, Kyle Pitts wasn't there. So it ended up being Jamar Chase at wide receiver for that first pick. I think we can talk about that for a second. Just, what were you thinking, Jeff? I mean, I think we've talked about that Joe Burrow situation a lot.
Right. Jamar Chase is obviously a very talented football player, but with Penei Sewell still there on the board, you just really can't justify this pick, especially with what happened last year that everybody knows about Joe Burrow, someone who's not going to be as mobile compared to what he was scouted and drafted upon. So it's cool and all to get the LSU connection back down there, but I don't think this was the right pick here for the Bengals. The Bengals draft did not scare me whatsoever. I think they could have drafted a lot better.
Yeah, honestly, this pick for me was also kind of in the realm of like, all right, well, the Bengals fan base talks a big game about how they improved in the free agent market and everything. I highly disagree with them. And I also just think I laugh at watching their reveal of their jerseys and seeing you pause when Joe Burrow's sitting on the throne and he has the huge scar on his knee. And I just think, yeah, I don't know that picking a wide receiver really helps him get away from Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett and the new Browns defense. So we'll see how that ends up helping for, Burrow. I know there's the connection between them and everything from their time there. But outside of that, honestly, the only other notes to make about their draft, we'll talk about their second pick later. But two guys that I had pegged for later round guys for the Browns, Joseph Azai out of Texas, who's a DN / outside linebacker, and Tyler Shelvin from LSU, who would have probably been a very good pick as a D tackle as well. Obviously, we had that missing piece with Richardson. I don't know what I was going to say there. Couldn't think of it. But, those are two good picks, but the rest of this draft class for them is kind of all over the place. But they did go offensive tackle, number 46 in round 2. Jackson Carman from Clemson obviously played on some pretty good teams this past couple of years. So who knows if he's going to be able to make that transition later. Obviously, I think first round offensive linemen are typically your guys that do really well. And then after that, you kind of have to take a chance on someone.
Yeah, at least they went offensive tackle with their second pick, which I guess is better than nothing. But when you hear the draft analysts and pundits on stage saying that Penei Sewell is, if they had to pick one guy out of this draft class to be a surefire Hall of Famer, and they say, it's an offensive lineman, and then you skip over him for a wide receiver, when in the grand scheme of things, that was probably Cincinnati's the least of their problems last year. I thought between Joe Burrow being a rookie who played pretty well for being, his age, plus some of their younger wide receivers, and, they still had baggage kind of laying around with AJ Green. but they have T. Higgins and they have Tyler Boyd. So I pretty much thought wide receiver was the least of their worries looking on last year. I think it's interesting how they took a running back. I mean, obviously a round 6 late running back pick, but I think that makes sense. Losing Giovanni Bernard, they might need some competition for a secondary back over there, especially if Joe Mixon is going to continue to be injury prone. But I think a B is actually pretty much optimistic. We're both looking at the PFF grades just for summaries, but PFF has them as a draft grade of B. I think that's probably high.
Yeah, and obviously we'll be taking a look at the Ravens and the Steelers draft, and a B isn't, bad by all means. It's highly optimistic, like Jeff is kind of getting at, but it's certainly better than what I think one of the other teams did in the division. It might actually speak to what the division ends up being this year in terms of rankings when it's all said and done. But besides that, let's move on to the next group. Let's go to the Pittsburgh Steelers, talking about that worst overall grade given by PFF. I mean, Jeff, me and you, we joked about it today on Twitter, in our DMs and everything, about their first 2 picks. I mean, Najee Harris out of Alabama, questionably, we don't know if he was even the best running back rated. They had that guy from North Carolina rated higher than him. And then I don't know how to say Pat. How do you say that, Jeff? You watch a little bit of Penn State, right?
I think it's Frymouth, but it might be
Okay.
Fryermuth. It's spelled Fryermuth, but I don't even think PFF has it spelled right.
Right.
But he's from
Yeah.
Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, he was the second best tight end available after Kyle Pitts. But
Right.
I mean, what needs does this fill for this team? I mean, yes, they lost James Conner, but drafting a running back in the first round is something that you do when you're like the rest of your team is good. When you have an offensive line to run behind, which they don't, considering they lost 2 of their best starters, one of those starters going to a division rival. I mean, just baffling to see that they would go weirdly skilled position players on the offensive side of the ball first.
I totally agree. While I 100% think Najee Harris is the best running back in this draft, pretty undisputably in my opinion. It just doesn't make sense, and I think that the Steelers fan base honestly agrees with me. Just kind of feeling them out and talking to them about the pick. A lot of them disliked it because they make good points. I mean, they bring up to me that James Conner was 1,000-yard back 2 years ago, 2 or 3 seasons ago, and that their offensive line was probably top 15, maybe even top 10 graded as far as run blocking went. And last year they were dead last. I'm pretty sure they were 31 or 32nd in run blocking. So Najee Harris doesn't fix that whatsoever. He's not going to block on the offensive line. I think Kendrick Green is a good pick just because they're not going to have Pouncey forever. Pouncey's probably, coming to an end here with Big Ben. And they're always good at being able to find guys in later rounds. So I think that this is probably low for PFF as a C. I think it probably is a little bit higher. I think Quincy Roche is probably maybe their best pick, honestly,
Best
all the way down to
value.
216 with just everybody involved.
Yeah, I had Buddy Johnson out of Texas A&M pegged as a depending on what we were going to do in the draft before we got Joke as someone that we could get in a later round, as someone we'd like at linebacker. But yeah, honestly, for me, first of all, they have Eric Ebron there at tight end. Obviously, probably not for long, but just a weird draft by them. I would have expected them to maybe reach on some offensive linemen a little bit sooner than they did. But obviously, like you said, they're a great organization. They have a great coach and everything. So they'll be able to coach a lot of these guys that they got in the later rounds into, quality players, if not this season, definitely in the future, just kind of like how I believe a lot of the guys we drafted will be future presence for the team. But, PFF giving them a C, I think that's kind of fair. I feel like their first 2 picks are very bad. I don't like either one of them. I don't like the fit with the tight end. I can understand drafting a running back, but not first round talent. It's also kind of like making the argument for guys like Saquon Barkley, who, gets drafted second and, has been injured and doesn't really change how well a team does if you don't have an offensive line to run behind, and you were talking to the whole point of them being ranked 31st in run block this season, I mean, it'll be tough to see what and to be fair, I don't know that Najee Harris is a 3-down back, so we'll see what they do there. They do like to give Snell gets 3rd down reps, I think, a lot,
Right.
but it'll be
They have
interesting.
3 running backs, 3 or maybe even 4 now.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, Big Ben, I think he's got a loaded skill players around him. His wide receiving group is very good. I think it's very talented at times. Obviously, the running back and tight ends are now stacked to his favor. We'll just see how he plays. I think it's kind of the idea of, is he going to be able to, do what he did early on last season and kind of what he's done in his career, now going into his second year removed from that big time injury that kept him out of in rehab for a while. So honestly, I'm not impressed by the Steelers draft. And I think the Bengals, I don't know what their schedules are. I haven't looked at the Bengals, Ravens and Steelers. All I know, we play them twice a year, but I'm going to guess that the Steelers and the Bengals are going to be fighting for 3rd and 4th place in the division. So Jeff, you got anything else to say? What is the feeling? I mean, you live with some Pittsburgh Steelers fans. What's the feeling overall?
Live with pretty big Steelers fans. They didn't like Harris first round, and they were very confused about the tight end in the second round. They like Green and they like Quincy Roche. So I think that I think the major consensus here for most people who actually watch them was to get an offensive lineman in the first round. I was even hearing, a big reach maybe for Landon Dickerson in the first round, and just completely kind of blowing up the board in that sense, where I don't even know when he went, but I was suggesting Liam Eichenberg the whole week leading up to the draft. But I'm glad you brought up the wide receivers, because logically looking at their picks, they do not draft the wide receiver in this draft, which on the surface of it, that makes a lot of sense, because their wide receiving core in theory is pretty stacked and pretty stable. But Juju's on a 1-year deal. You would assume if you're them that Deontay Johnson is going to figure it out, but he's proven pretty much so far he can't catch. That's probably why they drafted Frymuth, because Eric Ebron couldn't really catch last year. And, some guys, they could be all good prospects. I mean, trust me, you've seen it. Braylon Edwards, good prospect. If you can't catch football in the game, you can't catch football in the game. It's weird. It just happens sometimes. And I think Chase Claypool is probably their best wide receiver, but he's getting into bar fights and stuff. So I think that you could get run out of a city pretty quick. Not that you get run out of the league, but they're not going to be putting up with him if he's an attitude problem. I mean, you saw what they did with Antonio Brown and Lev Bell, a couple years ago. So they're not going to be putting up with him if he's getting in a bar fight. So no wide receiver here. Thought it was a little interesting. I don't think their wide receiving core is stable. It's talented, but I don't know how stable it actually is.
That's a very fair point. Talking about wide receiving cores, moving on to the Baltimore Ravens, they finally give Lamar Jackson another option to throw to at the outside position with their first pick, Rashad Bateman from Minnesota, a guy that one of our own players, Odell Beckham Jr., has been training with in the offseason. Let's talk about this pick first. What were your thoughts? I know me and you tossed around the idea of Bateman being a pick for the Browns.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think he potentially slots into their number 1 wide receiver over there. I think he's got a good chance to be basically the Justin Jefferson of last draft. Probably, not with a throwing quarterback, though. I mean, that's the problem. I think Lamar has the potential to make a wide receiver a potent weapon, but with the team, it's just so hard for them, because they move on from Orlando Brown to sign Villanueva, which I didn't understand that. I think the Steelers got the better end of that deal for how much the Ravens paid them, honestly. And then you just look at the defenses and the front parts of the defenses in our division now, especially even Cincinnati now. I mean, Lamar Jackson, he's going to be pressed to run. He's never been less of a throwing quarterback than he is now, just because of the guys coming off the edge in the AFC North. So you have to go get a wide receiver there, just because I feel like you have to appeal to Lamar and you have to appeal to the organization, kind of like how the Green Bay Packers, they haven't been able to do that forever, and that's why Aaron Rodgers is upset. So I think Lamar needs help over there, especially in the wide receiver category. I think they're fine at running back, and I think Lamar leans on their tight ends a good amount over there, and we know their defense is going to be good. So wide receiver first overall, I think Bateman has a good chance of being a breakout offensive rookie.
Yeah, I like the pick. Honestly, like you said, he could immediately be that number one wide receiver. And to be fair to Lamar Jackson, after I tried to bash on him before week one of last year, he did develop into a better passer than I expected. But we'll be able to see, what they scheme up in terms of game planning now. Obviously, the more and more they go through with running the ball with him, the more they give the opportunity for him to get, whacked by guys and, potentially injured, which obviously you never want to see. But a thing to think about game planning, and maybe Rashad Bateman opens up their playbook for more passes and stuff like that instead of, trying to run the ball too much. I like it. Honestly, I didn't know a whole lot about Rashad Bateman, to be personally honest. And, Minnesota is an interesting place to come out of course, but practicing with Odell Beckham Jr., obviously there's some praise to be had there. But moving on from that, I think they have one of the most questionable picks in the draft. They pick Owe, one of the guys that we actually scouted for ourselves coming out of Penn State at edge. Honestly, I said this with Owe when we talked about him was, he's a project guy in my eyes.
Yep.
Obviously he would have been behind Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett on our team, which would have helped him out a lot, Tech McKinley. And he wouldn't have to do stuff immediately. But if I remember correctly, the Ravens did not re-sign the guy they got from Jacksonville. His name escapes me right now. Ngakwe, right?
Yep.
I don't believe they
And they lost
re-signed him.
somebody else. Did they lose Bowser too?
No, they re-signed Bowser. I'm
Oh, they
pretty sure they
re-signed
re-signed
Bowser.
Bowser,
Okay.
but Bowser
Yeah,
is
you're
like
right. Always gonna have to play.
always going to have to play. And, you know, uh, it's going to be interesting to see how he turns out because I had him as a guy pegged that we could potentially go after. Obviously, we passed up on him and let him drop to the Ravens. We'll see how that pans out for them. I think that's probably where they take kind of a dip in the strategy that I had planned out for them. Usually, they take more sure things as an organization, but we'll see what the Harbaugh man does over there. And looking at the rest of their draft, I honestly think that they were very, praised during the whole draft process and even afterwards. On PFF here, we have them as a B plus, which is interesting. I think the other two good picks that they have come in round 4 and round 5 with Tylan Wallace out of Oklahoma State. I've heard great things about him. We'll see how he slots into their wide receiving core. But then they grab an Ohio State guy, Sean Wade. Let me ask you, me and you both watched Sean Wade, especially the last 3 games of this past year, I should say. What is your thought process here of Sean Wade going to the Baltimore Ravens, besides there becoming an evident pipeline of Ohio State guys to Baltimore?
Right. I mean, you can't go wrong drafting guys from Ohio State for the most part. But I think this is very appropriate for Sean Wade, 160. I think organizations as a whole got lucky on Sean Wade because I'm not 100% sure, but after his 2019 season, he could have went to the draft and he probably would have been like a second round guy, maybe even a first round guy. And that was a benefit of him being in a stellar defense that had Chase Young up front and he had other good people around him. So, and then you see him this year, and I thought he played abysmal this year for Ohio State. I feel like his numbers were probably good, probably better than me kind of trashing the guy. But I thought every time I watched him, especially one-on-one man coverage, he was getting torched by, I mean, obviously perennial guys in college football. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, guys that went out in the draft this year as quarterbacks, but still, I thought he was way better. I thought Ohio State kind of just snuck him in that 2019 defense. And 2020, he kind of had to be like the main guy, and he just couldn't do it. So I think 5 is probably perfect for the Ravens. But I mean, if you go and draft him in 2019, I think he's a bust because you probably get him in the first or second round. And he sucks.
Yeah, I think the bashing of Sean Wade is unfair, mainly because he was moved from that 2019 defense from being a safety to being a corner to an outside corner. Typically, when you're a safety, it means you're not as fast as the typical outside cornerbacks that cover
He's
the number
slow.
one guys. Yeah, and I think that was pretty evident. And so I wouldn't be surprised because obviously we know that over in Baltimore, they got two very exceptional starting corners. I wouldn't be surprised to see Sean Wade make a transition back into the safety role. I watched someone that I played with, Sean Crawford, transition from being an outside corner in high school in his first year of college football to being a safety after injuries and everything. Obviously, because once he had a ton of knee injuries, but once you have those type of injuries, it kind of slows you down just a bit. And so, we'll see. Maybe that'll help Wade out a lot more. But you're totally right. I mean, he came out of that championship game or not championship game, but that game against Clemson last year,
Mm.
the bowl game against Clemson, after getting a targeting hit, I believe. And a lot of people were very upset that his season ended that way. He opted to return again. And honestly, it hurt himself. And an unfortunate thing.
Yep.
Just looking here at what PFF has, I'll just read it straight up because it's essentially all about him in day 3. It says, if Sean Wade wouldn't have returned in 2020 after initially opting out, he would have certainly come off the board on day 2, just like Jeff was saying. He was an exceptional slot corner for the Buckeyes in 2019, but struggled mightily on the outside in 2020. The physicality wasn't there, and his press technique was a mess. Wade proved that he's a safety slot corner and not the outside corner many thought he would be. In 2019, he made more plays on the ball, 8, than first downs allowed, 7, in the slot en route to a 78.6 PFF grade. He can be a quality defensive back, just not an outside corner. This was good value for Baltimore. So obviously, like we said, not going to be an outside corner, but was a potential, good move for them in terms of developing a defensive back in the later round. And obviously, a guy just coming out of Ohio State thought we should make that point made. But with that being said, B plus for them. Obviously, they had the second best grade by PFF standards after us.
I think
So
PFF's right there, though. I think Browns are clear front runners for best draft and best offseason. I don't see how
yes,
you could debate those two things.
absolutely. And I think outside of the draft, because every time you go into the draft, you can only get better because you only add players. But overall, Jeff, just let's finish it off with this. Besides the Browns obviously being the clear winners of the offseason in the draft, put it all together for me. How would you have ranked how the opposing teams in the AFC North did this year in the offseason / the draft? Just do, order worst to best.
I think, I guess I'm going to get, crazy enough, I think I'm going to have to give Cincinnati 1, even though it's just such bad pickings. I mean, I don't think anybody did exceptionally well. I think the Ravens didn't do anything awful, but they didn't do anything great. So I'll put them 2. And I just think the undisputed cap problems that the Steelers ran into, that's going to hurt you either way. So I'll put them last. Cincinnati got talent wise better, but I don't know if their team actually got better as far as people going to be playing together and what they actually needed. But they gained the most talent, I believe, from the offseason. Steelers lost the most.
Yeah, obviously it's easier to add talent when there's a clear and obvious need for it, opposed to, a Baltimore Ravens team that is a playoff team and has less
Right.
holes to fill. So I can agree with you on the entirety of your rankings. Cincinnati won, Baltimore second, only because obviously, they didn't have as many holes to fill. And then the Steelers just had an absolute breakdown of like people leaving, having a couple debacles of like people just wanting out and them having to figure out what's going on with them situational wise. And then bringing back Juju, I don't know,
They
obviously,
could have spent that money better for sure.
yeah, I we'll see what happens there. And that could have led to a better draft pick than maybe tight end in the second round, but we'll see what happens there. But obviously, I think it's just a matter of the point being the Browns were clear winners and are clear favorites, I think, for the AFC North, if not, right there next to the Baltimore Ravens. So, Jeff, you got anything else before we close this up?
Nope. I think that's off season and a draft. 2021 all wrapped up. Well, I'm excited for next year already.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can't wait for the season to get here. I can't wait for training camp to get here and just, be able to hear some news about the guys that we drafted and we brought in. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure everyone else at home is looking forward to it. Just a quick reminder, guys, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe. Obviously, we've had a ton of views, a ton of love the past couple of videos that we put out, and we really appreciate you guys if you could leave a subscribe, a like, a comment on the videos and everything. We really do want to hear from you guys, and we do love that the community is growing out here. So we do appreciate it. And with that being said, thank you, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.